My guest today is writer-director Tom Harp of the feature comedies The Donor Party on Hulu Disney Plus and his newest feature film, the hilarious heartfelt comedy Home Delivery. Now, after studying film and theater in college, Tom began his career as a cinematographer, working with acclaimed director Lynn Shelton of Hump Day and Laggies and many others. And then he transitioned into writing and directing, making award-winning short films that played in festivals all over the world, including 8 Minutes to Love with Emmy winner Sandra Oh. Now, after Paramount optioned one of his scripts, he relocated his family to LA and he became a frequent contributor to Funny or Die and Rainn Wilson's Soul Pancake, where his short films racked up millions of views. Now, after his collaboration with Rainn Wilson brought Tom on to co-write and co-direct and produce his hit scripted podcast, Dark Air with Terry Carnation. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome writer, director Tom Harp and his newest feature film, Home Delivery, to the show. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
You're very, very welcome. Now, I absolutely love this new film of yours, Home Delivery. I know that you wrote it and directed it. So, where did this crazy idea come from?
The wonderful thing about your intro is that you mentioned Lynn Shelton, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention that she really helped me with this, which is why the film's dedicated to her. Also, she was a dear friend and passed away recently. So this is a labor of love on a lot of levels. But the film comes from experiences that I have three kids, and two were born. Two of them are biologically mine, and one is adopted. So I wanted to, when we were having our first kid, we didn't know what we were doing. We were young parents. My wife is brilliant. She's a doctor, but that sometimes means that she overthinks things. And so we wanted to have this wonderful experience. We wanted to invite our family into the birth room. We wanted to have, she was in med school, so she had an OB on standby, but she was really interested in having a midwife and a doula. And then because I was a cinematographer, I had one of my friends come in and she interviewed all of us, and we had our family. And suddenly in this small 10-foot by 7-foot room, maybe, we had all these people crammed in watching my poor wife, who was wearing basically a hospital gown and nothing else, just try to have a baby. And in that moment, I realized this is ridiculous. What are all these people doing here? I love them all, but what are they doing here? And I think that's where the seed planted. But it still took lots of years before I decided that that's what I was going to write. And the reason why I mentioned Lynn Shelton is she had, as you mentioned, I had a script get option at Paramount. I had another one get option over at Sony, and nothing got made. So it was very frustrating to have options, but nothing gets made. And meanwhile, she's making these micro budget movie. Then it became Hump Day, which got a lot of acclaim. She started working on shows like Mad Men and Fresh Off the Boat. And so I was like, you got to tell me how you do it. Like, what's your secret? So I took her out to lunch and I was like, but buy everything. I don't care. Just tell me what it is that you do, and how do you craft those stories. And she really helped me with three important lessons. One is to limit your screen time, so the days of filming, so you don't want to have lots of costume changes, because every time someone goes into wardrobe, they go off set for a half an hour at the fastest. They're offset, they're changing, they're getting new makeup, they're doing all that stuff, and they come back. That's a half an hour that you've lost. Every time you move locations, you lose at least 2 hours. So she said, first, limit the screen time so you have fewer costumes and fewer things that once you're at a location, you can just film and just do it. Secondly is limit the locations so that you are not losing 2 hours in a day. So just one location per day. And she said, ideally, you want to be in one location for a couple days, because then you can leave the gear and just come the next morning, turn on the lights and start going. And then the third thing, and this is the really important one, is that she said you really need to lean into your strengths, because if you are doing something where you're asking people to do it for nearly nothing, and you are doing something that you know your limitations are already baked into the shoot, you have to do it, has to be the most pure distillation of what you do. And she said, so for you, Tom, that's writing great dialogue and having wonderful, you understand family dynamics. So she was like, that's what I would recommend you do. I still, it took a couple years before I came up with the whole, when everything worked out together. But those are the two genesis. One is the real life experience, and two is the just fantastic advice from Lynn Shelton.
Well, before we started this interview, you said something, so I'm going to ask you now that it 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 took a while to get this film made, and are their mindset just stuck in one or two types of genres where they don't really look at comedies
I
like
don't
they used to?
I don't want to categorize things as broadly as that. But what I will say is that this was something that, it's an ensemble comedy. And so you have to have actors who don't need to be number one on the call sheet. You need to have people who have checked their egos at the door and are playing a team sport. Um, and some of my heroes are like Robert Altman is one of my heroes, and he has these wonderfully crafted and wonderfully cast movies with lots of storylines that interweave, and everyone is an essential part of it. So that was an inspiration for me. But I would say that the hardest thing right now is that if you're not in a, it's a tough thing to get people to want to do this kind of movie, because it's not as, it's not a hard comedy. It's not like a, like hard R comedy. Not that it was easy making Donor Party, but that, it was more of a straight ahead comedy. And so it had kind of a more direct path to getting made. The main reason why it took a long time, I mean, it was this movie, the script was beloved by everyone who read it. So I feel very fortunate for that. And it was set up actually at a studio that wanted to make it desperately. And, I wrote it so that I could direct it. And they were very supportive of that. But at the time, they, I didn't have any credits that would lead them to be able to get the right cast. So that's the reason why I did Funny or Die, was so I could get more credits and show people I could do more of that kind of stuff, because all they really had to work on were these two short films that I had done. The one with Sandra Oh, and then another one called Fortune Hunters, which had also played everywhere. But they weren't, I didn't win an Academy Award, so it wasn't like, oh, everything was lit up by the short film. And I think that that's just, it's a tough sell. And what I will say is, it's a very tough business for, you're sticking your neck out if you say we should make this movie. It's so much easier for them to say no. They get to keep their job if they say no. They could lose their job if they say yes, and it becomes a bomb. So I think there's a lot of fear in Hollywood from that. And me not having enough experience was an off ramp for them to be able to. I mean, they, bless them, they, the first place that had it, they optioned it twice. So they really believed in it and they really tried. And I had great meetings with really interesting cast members. But I was the boat anchor. And so then, going out and doing all that subsequent work really was the thing that gave people the confidence to say, okay, for this amount of money, yes, we trust you. So
Well,
that's,
Tom, the thing that when I watched this film, and I watched it a couple of times,
oh, thank you.
and because I was really wanting to get the essence of the whole story, because there's multiple storylines which we're going to get into, but I kept looking at this film as a whole, and I'm like, okay, this film is too good, so you can't classify it as like Lifetime or Hallmark. So it's way above that. And then I kept thinking, this film reminds me of something. And I'm sitting here and I'm racking my brain and I'm like, this is the type of film. And I'm not talking just the story. I'm not talking about the storyline. I'm just talking about when at the look and the essence of the whole film. I'm thinking, okay, this reminds me of when we would get films to go to the theater, like 40-Year-Old Virgin with Steve Carell, or we would see
Hmm.
the rom-com with Katherine Heigl and Gerard Butler. And so I'm getting that essence of this film, and I'm like, why can't we have more of these?
You have no argument from me. um, I'll tell you, I have a lot of heroes. I think that Penny Marshall is one of my heroes. I think she's just, she was able to make wonderful movies that, that were mainstream, but had a tremendous amount of heart, were really funny. I think Rob Reiner, another one of my heroes. His run is unbelievable from Spinal Tap all the way through, A Few Good Men and even beyond. So he's crazy talented. But James L. Brooks, Albert Brooks, these are the people who I grew up on. When I was a kid, my mom took me to see broadcast news when I was a kid, and I think it had a huge impact on me. It's the kind of story where it's character first, and the comedy comes from character, which is what I try to do. For me, it's really I love Judd Apatow's heart. I think he's an extremely soulful person. He doesn't get the credit for that as much, but I think This Is 40 is a great story about people in crisis, but you're laughing through the crisis. And I wanted to do those are the kinds of stories that I love.
You bring up Albert Brooks, and now that I'm thinking
Hmm.
about it, if Albert Brooks was cast in Home Delivery, he would be playing
Oh,
Peter McNichol's part.
yes. Yes, but Peter McNichol, how would you say, like he kills it. I
He
I love Peter
kills
McNichol.
that part in this film.
Oh,
He was one of my
he's
favorite
so good.
characters.
And I will tell him, because he is a lovely person, and
Well,
I've stayed in touch with everyone. So,
we're going to get into Peter's part and some of the
okay.
other ones in this film. So I want to break this down because you brought, like you said, you brought multiple storylines into this film. And I'm going to be very careful, ladies and gentlemen, not to spoil any of the plot lines, but you have husband and wife having a baby, major plot
Mhm.
line. You have the parents
That's
of the
obvious. It's in
upcoming
the
mother.
trailers.
Yeah, yeah. So you have parents of the upcoming mother, which are both divorced with one remarried. You have a sister, which I will not spoil that storyline because it plays so well into this film. And for you, was it a challenge to balance humor and a bit of serious storylines with the added element of family dynamics in the film?
And I don't mean to be weird about this, but not at all, because that's kind of the way that my brain works. I really believe that, let me put it this way. When I had our first child, it was the moment that I decided I was going to only write comedy, because before then I was really, I loved edgy stuff, and would have said I was a fan of, and I still am a fan of so many filmmakers, but I was thinking much more like, oh, I'll be this edgy filmmaker. Love David Fincher, love David Lynch, love, but I was holding my baby, my firstborn, and was just, she was so happy and lit up, and then looked at me really intently, and then shot diarrhea out of her, like so much out of her diaper that it went all over my shirt. It went onto the wall. And then I looked down at her, and she had the most beautiful smile. I was like, this is what life is. Like, I love this wonderful little being who just destroyed the wall on my shirt, everything around me. And that mixture of the insanity of that moment and the pure love that was going on, that is kind of my secret sauce. I really feel like you can, I always look for what's ridiculous about this situation, because there's a lot to lose hope in the world. And so I always find that, for me, I love reading The Onion. I try to read The Onion as much as possible, because it just says, okay, I understand that the world is crazy. I understand that the world is sad right now, but let's find an angle to be able to lighten the load. And I think that that's an essential part of who I am. It's My wife is a doctor, and I've my job essentially is, aside from raising the kids and making sure she gets off to work on time and is fed and has her latte and all that kind of good stuff, is to lighten her load, because her load gets very heavy. So for me, that's really, it's baked into who I am. It's the long answer. I'm sorry, but that's
No, no, because
that's
when I
yeah.
watch this film, and it's films like this one that causes my mind to start doing comparisons. Because,
Mm.
and that's a good thing because I love the film, and I'm like, oh, like I told you, why can't we have more of these? And it's funny that you bring up the fact that there's Penny Marshall, Rob Reiner, and I can see elements of Rob Reiner in this film. Um, I can see bits of Ron Howard. I can see a
Oh,
little bit
how did I
of,
forget him?
yeah, I can see a little bit of that heartfelt Spielberg tone that comes in to this whole story. And so when you're directing a scene, and I'm trying to think of a scene in this film. We'll just say it's one of the one of the living room scenes where everybody's there. When you're directing, does your mind is your mind automatically seeing every storyline into play at the same time?
Yes and no. I think that I know. So uh, what I do to make sure that the writer doesn't get ignored on set, even when it's me, is I will write down on an index card, this is what the scene is about, and I'll write down something important for each character in this scene, so that I remember, so that I can just look at it at a moment's notice. And because sometimes in the moment you get excited by something that's happening on set, and it starts to derail you. And that barely happened on this, even with as many people, because everyone was in the same, that was the big lesson for me, was the director's job is to make sure that everyone is telling the same story. I liken it to, like, the director brings a board game over to someone's house, and the board game has, this is the board that we're playing on. Here's the rules that we're playing with. Here are your playing pieces. This is what we're doing. And it's going to take us, a certain amount of time. And we are all agreeing that we're going to sit down and play this game. And that's really the most important thing that a director can do, is make sure that everyone is playing, from the department heads to the editor to obviously the actors, that everyone is playing the same game. And that way you get those wonderful moments where people have great ideas, and they're additive. So I've been on stuff where, especially some of the Funny or Die things, because I was working with great improvisers and great comedic talent, where someone had a great idea, but it was starting to derail the whole story. And what I learned really early on is, for sketch comedy, you have to get in and out. You don't have a lot of time for flights of fancy. I mean, we were also told, try to keep it to 3.5 minutes or shorter. So you don't have the time. And what that created for me was a discipline of, like, recognizing the good ideas that are still inside the world that I've created, and also recognizing the ones that aren't, and how to honor that person's creativity, but at the same time protect the story. And that's the biggest challenge when you have incredibly talented actors. So we spent a lot of time beforehand talking about things that were important. And then when I'm on set, I was able to use two cameras. So that's another thing I learned, very on the short with Sandra Oh is where I learned it. We had one camera on that, and it took forever to do something that should have been so easy if we'd had two cameras running the whole time. Um, and you lose the joy and the juice in the scene if you have to redo it and redo it. So for scenes where and also you lose the moment of improvisation. If someone does something wonderful and someone reacts in a wonderful way, if you've only got the camera on the person who is creating the moment and not on the people who are reacting, then you have to try to remind them to do that, and it's never as good. So I always try to run two cameras to be able to get those moments. And one of the biggest challenges that we had was with these tableaus of people, so many people in the room, how were we able to keep the action interesting? So what I try to do as often as possible is stage it so that you might have someone in the foreground, but then two people in the background. And I made sure they weren't out of focus. So we had to make sure that when we were filming it, they're, obviously they're not competing with the first person, but you can see them well enough to see their reaction and get the extra laugh that, especially when Leslie Ann Warren's saying something and someone's reacting behind her. It's almost like in The Office when you cut to Jim and gives a look, but I had to have Jim in the shot at the same time just because we had so many people. So it was a challenge, but it was a wonderful challenge.
Yeah,
Does that answer your question?
that's a Spielberg move because
Well, he's the master.
yeah, and cause see when I watched Home Delivery, and you have let's say within a scene, and the living room, you guys, there's so many people in there, and
8.
yeah, so you've got, and what I loved is that, and we're gonna get into the cast here in a moment, but you have someone who's got the main point of dialogue. And because of the way you set the camera up, if, like you said, if somebody has a reaction to that dialogue, you see it. And it was like what Spielberg did with Indiana Jones. He 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 literally, it's almost like he took the audience in the theater and made them look where he wanted them to look. And then doing a long continuous shot, he would take the other actor and eventually they would turn around and change the dynamic and the focus of the audience. And but you did it in such a very subtle way that, I mean, I'm watching the film and regardless who's talking or interacting, you're seeing it all and you're absorbing it all at the same time.
Thank you. I really loved working with my cinematographer, David Volrath. He was a great collaborator. He knew that the most important thing for me on this was to feel lived in, so that you would fall right into the rhythm of the family, and to try to make sure that any camera moves that were happening were not for show, but they were part of the story. So we just, it was all very tightly crafted, but at the same time it had to be free enough to allow for the chaos that was going to happen. So it was a challenge, and what the beauty of running two cameras, why it was so helpful for us, is that what we were able to do is create an energy on set where everyone knew that at any given moment they were on. So they didn't save their best performance for their close up. They had to they had to be there when they were delivering the lines and when they're listening. And they had to, and because you never knew when their line came up, we might be on them with a different camera. So what that creates is, it's almost like being on stage. And that's something that I got from my theater training, was you want to be able to get everyone to have that energy so that they're giving 100% to their scene partner. And I've seen a lot of times where someone will phone it in, or they'll be like, oh, I'm done with my close-up. So, and then we would have to shoot over someone's shoulder wearing the same shirt, and like a wig to get to do that stuff. And that always drove me crazy whenever I saw something like
That
that.
that, that would drive me nuts, Tom.
Well, and it's not fair to the other actor who's given their all, and then the person. I mean, sometimes they have to leave, and sometimes schedules are tricky. I understand all that. That's not what we're talking about. I'm talking about people who are, we needed to have a no diva policy on this set, because it was going to create, we couldn't treat one person as the center. We had to have the story dictate what the focus was going to be of any given scene, because as you mentioned, there's multiple stories, and so everyone has their, we pulled focus literally from one person to another in the middle of a scene because the dynamic shifts.
But
So
you did it so well because I always pay attention to camera movement and and I pay attention to focus. So if you have an actor in the foreground and you have an actor in the background, I've seen I've seen this a lot in short films where they should have reversed the focus because it would have made more
mm-hmm.
sense. And so sometimes I look at it, okay, maybe that's just a rookie mistake. And but yours was spot on. But
Oh, thank you.
I have to tell you though, I love the way that you started this film from from the very beginning. I love the way that you started it because you don't lead the audience into the actual two main characters. You're bringing us a storyline that we don't quite maybe understand at the beginning, but it shows up in the middle of the
Mm.
film. And that's when you have Jimmy Simpson and Lindsay Sloan. And that's really, I'm not going to spoil it. That's the deepest storyline in the film. But the way that you started it out, it was really this very subtle twist, wasn't it?
First of all, thank you so much for saying that. The opening of this movie I love it because and it was one of the things where I was so clear, and I had such a clear image in my mind of how I wanted it to start, how I wanted it to, when you see the opening and it goes and it says Los Angeles, and then it goes off to the side and it loops around, and then it goes to Denver and it loops around, and it connects everyone, because what I wanted to show is how all these people are connected. Um, and that was so there's momentum in the beginning. There's, the mother's on the phone, she's very sweet, and she's lying to her daughter right to her face, and we see that she's lying. And so it tells you a lot about what's happening. We have a scene in the opening that, again, I don't want to spoil it, but there's a scene in a doctor's office that doesn't make any sense when based on what you're seeing. And I wanted, because it's something that's important, I wanted to obscure the fact that it's important by making it as funny as possible. So, and I love the guy who we had, who's the surgeon in that scene. He's an old friend, and it was really important to have it be like, why is this here? And when you come back to it later, hopefully you've forgotten it to a degree so that you're like, oh, of course. I wanted that. I feel like the most beautiful moments in a film are when things are inevitable, but they completely surprise you. So when you think about it, you're like, oh, I get it. But in the moment, you're like, whoa, whoa. So that to me is the greatest. That's what I'm working towards, is those moments where the audience forgets what they're seeing, and when it comes back, it's like it all interlocks.
Yeah, and when it comes back, and I have the most perfect saying right now for when that scene comes back, but I'm not going to
Hmm.
say it because I don't want to give it away because everybody has to see it. But I have this perfect line that I would, I mean, if 10 million people saw this film already, it won't matter about spoiling anything, but I'll just keep it to myself. But the way that you had it come back is really, to me, it was probably one of the most profound moments in the film.
Oh, thank you.
Is what that's how I'll define it without giving anything away. So it was
And Lindsay
incredible.
Sloan kills it in that moment. I mean, she's
Oh,
just
oh my
phenomenal.
gosh. She killed it. But then it was because see when we'll just say when she delivers that scene, it's really capped off by Jimmy Simpson.
Mhm.
You know,
I saw it in theaters on this past weekend, and I heard a woman sobbing. So Spoiler alert, you might want to, keep some Kleenex handy.
Well, yeah, yeah, because I have a question that I'm going to be careful to ask because there are going to be people, mostly women, when they see this film, there's going to be a lot of them that are truly going to relate
Mm.
to many of the elements of the storyline, is how I'll put it.
I think it's
So,
fair to say that this story is really about a lot of different journeys towards family. And so the framing device of it being a home birth, inviting your family in, is really trying to figure out what family means. What does family mean to people who've been estranged from their family or who have issues with their family? And my hope is that the humor allows you to laugh first at them and then recognize yourself in them and laugh then at yourself and maybe take yourself less seriously and that and then maybe break down some of those walls we've set up, because I think the last 5 years have been really hard on people. Beginning with COVID, it's just been, and I wrote this before COVID, but I think that there's all of the there's a lot of drama in family right now, and there's always been a lot of drama in family. There's a line that was in the movie that we cut for time, but it's one of my favorite lines, which is, um, you know, people know family knows how to push your buttons because they're the ones who installed them. So it's like that's the truth. We can drive each other crazy,
well, be
and
careful,
I
Tom.
think
I think that's another movie.
yes. Oh, I think it comes up in everything I do. It really does. Um, but it's so and I just really want, if people can, whatever their journey has been towards, having a family, not having a family, the challenges they have within their family. I hope that people feel the sense of forgiveness that comes through, like that you can forgive yourself and then maybe give other people some grace. And I don't mean it in necessarily like a Christian sense. You can take that way. I just mean in general for us to be graceful with each other and
Oh,
to know that we
oh,
make mistakes.
it's funny that you say that because you know there's a scripture in the New Testament that says we need to put up with one another, and
Yeah.
most people never read that. So they're choosing sides. No, sometimes you just got to put up with one another, and that's what this film does. It causes them to put up with one another in certain scenarios. And I have to ask because I kept watching and watching and watching, and only you
Hmm.
know the true answer. Because actress Melanie Field, was she really
Hmm.
pregnant, or was that the best pregnancy prosthesis ever made?
Man, I was so worried about that going into it. No, she was not pregnant. Although she has subsequently had twins. So, um, I think we gave her baby fever. Doing this movie. um, but she really, it was, there were three bellies that we used. One had to go up to, just below her bra, and then the other one could be for when she had a top on that covered a little bit more. So there were like degrees. The hardest one was the one that went all the way up and went all the way down. It had to blend seamlessly, so she was in makeup longer for that. But then the ones that, then there was the sort of medium difficulty, and then there was just like the shape for underneath the clothes. So like if she was going to be covered, so in the opening scene when she's in the dress, that's the easy one, and because we didn't have to see any skin. So there were three that we had and she was the only person we had to wait on, whenever we had scenes with her that involved a lot of the belly. But it was worth it. I think they did a great job.
Oh, it was fantastic on how well that was created. Now, as I said before, I just really found Peter McNichol's character quite funny for a number of reasons. But doesn't everyone have one of those relatives in their family tree? It's the unwanted historian, it's the advice giver when you don't want it, and always with a video camera in their hand.
And it's a very loving tribute to my father-in-law who passed away. In fact, the family videos that we see in it are all from him. They're videos of my wife and her sister. So with the family footage that we're watching in one of the scenes in the movie is literal footage of my wife and her sister as kids, little kids. And that was a tribute to him. But I agree. That's the thing. I really do hope that people see something in their family, and whoever they are. I think that Donald Faison is one of those actors who is so charming and so, he's the life of the party. He walks into a room and he lights up the room. In between takes, he would sing songs or talk about Star Wars in great depth. And he and Tracy Toms, who plays the midwife, their karaoke essentially is what it was between takes, was amazing. Like, I just wanted to sit and listen. And my assistant director was like, "Oh, we do have to get the next shot." But but it was, there was a really strong family vibe created on this. And I think that they all wanted to lean into that, and knew that the task was that they were all playing a team sport and creating a family. And what that, I mean, it translates. The chemistry on screen is just wonderful between everyone.
Well, with Donald Faison's character, I was trying to pinpoint it, and I'm gonna have you tell me. I was watching his character and all of the little side things outside of him and Melanie, and I'm thinking, okay, he's either maybe a bit selfish, or he's using the excuse like, I've got to go to work. I got to go take this celebrity somewhere in the limousine. Was he trying to maybe avoid a fear factor with what his wife was going through? Was he a bit selfish in an area, or maybe a little bit of all of it?
Well, and again, when this comes out on video, I hope that we can include some of the deleted scenes. There was a scene, it's one of my favorite scenes in the movie, between him and Jimmy Simpson. There were two. One's in the movie, and then the other one they just cut because they wanted the runtime to be an hour, 45 minutes. It's not that the scene wasn't great, because it's fantastic, but it happened in the middle of the night, and it was really about the two men having more of a, they, very vulnerable. They were both very vulnerable, and he confessed that he's scared, going into it. And I love that scene. They love that scene. So I hope that when it comes out, we're able to share that scene, because it's beautifully acted. They did a great job. Two people sort of whispering to each other in the middle of the night. Just a really sweet thing. So the answer is, I think he was scared.
Yeah.
And and he also had tried to, he had tried to cover his bases, but everything happened. When it's your first child, you don't know what you can expect. And so I think he sat and thought, well, look, we're due next week. This week is the Emmys. That's not a spoiler. He owns a fleet of limos, and he drives people to the Emmys, and the Emmys are a big deal for him. So he's committed to driving all these people. He tried to get himself out of it to cover what his, so that he would have people covering all of it so he could be there for his wife. But then, you know, one of his drivers ate street dogs in LA and got the stomach flu. And that's, again, I tried to layer that in really early in a place where no one would recognize that it would be important. And then it comes back later. So I think, honestly, he was trying to make the best situation. He wouldn't say he's selfish. He would say, well, it's not supposed to happen right now anyway. Um, but I think that no one knows what it's like to be a parent until you're a parent. And once you're a parent, you can never go backwards. You know, you can never, you can't undo that. You're always going to be thinking about, oh, what about the kid? What do I do now? But until that moment, you're not necessarily aware of all that. So
Well, you really have
long
an all.
answer.
Well, you really have an
Apologies.
all. Well, you really have an all-star cast in this film with Rainn Wilson, of course, Donald Faison, Leslie Ann Warren, Peter McNichol, Joe Pantoliano, and
Pantoliano.
then
Mhm.
Leslie Sloan and Tracy Thoms. So, how did you come to cast such great actors and their characters? Because they just shined in the film.
Thank you. I give a lot of credit to the casting director, Lisa Zagoria. She was one of the casting directors on Coda, which won the Academy Award. It was the one about the Marlee Matlin is in it, and it's the deaf family, and it's just a beautiful film. I think 2022 that they did that gorgeous film, and she has a really great knack for being able to listen to what the director is going for, and she brings her experience of what different actors are like, not just who's good, but also who's going to be good in that environment. And it was really important to me that I didn't work with a diva. So, you know, and I don't mean that in a male female sense. Like I didn't. No one can hog the spotlight. So when you look at the people who are in it, they have all been in either ensemble comedies like Clue is an ensemble, and Leslie Ann Warren's wonderful in it. She steals the scenes that she's in, but she doesn't do it in a way that hogs the spotlight. She just is that good. Joe Pantoliano is always kind of the funniest part of every scene that he's in, or the most menacing part. You know, Peter McNichol has been wonderful throughout his career. He was so good in Ally McBeal. Every single scene he's in, he lights up. But he, you know, he's so it's all those kinds of people. Donna Faison on Scrubs, you know, but also in Clueless and Remember the Titans. Those were the ones, especially Remember the Titans was something that I kept in the back of my mind because I needed him to go to a very sincere place. And that movie, he's not playing it for jokes. You know, he's got, you know, it's solid, dramatic, good stuff there. Um, and then Rainn Wilson, obviously on The Office. Lindsay Sloan has been in a bunch, you know, Bring It On and The Odd Couple, and you know, all these amazing things where they're all team players. So what she was able to do, and we basically, I wrote the part for Rainn, so that was, I knew him and I knew that he was a sweeter, more soulful person than he plays on The Office. And so I wanted to write a character that would give that side of him a chance to shine. So that was the first person who was involved, the first person who, you know, the only person I actually wrote it for. And then everyone else, you know, we started to assemble the pieces and parts. And you know, when we got Melanie Field, we wanted to find someone who would look like her in the family. And it was like, well, Peter McNichol looks like he could be her dad. And he's brilliant. So if it had been Peter McNichol and someone who didn't look exactly like him, that's fine. But, you know, it was something, there was a lot of serendipity. I think that Lindsay Sloan does look like Leslie Ann Warren. And so there's that thing where, for me, if I see another thing, well, we can't now that Diane Keaton's passed away, but she became everyone's mom, whether she looked like them or not. And, you know, it was, after a while, I was like, no, these people are not related to her. They don't look like her at all. They're white. That's the only thing that connects them. So that was important for me to have that continuity. But it was just a matter of finding the people who would respond to the material, knew that they were going to be, you know, that they would need to share the spotlight. And that's, a lot of actors can do that, but some actors can't. They, you know, they really, and it's not, they just need to have everything focused on them for them to get to whatever they need to do. I find it's easier getting comedic actors to do dramatic things. um, I feel like comedy comes from pain. A lot of comedy comes from pain. So you can just tap into that vulnerable, dork who decided to use comedy as a shield, and then you get them to bring that vulnerable part out, and they're amazing. Not to say that dramatic actors can't be funny, but I do think that it is there is an aspect of hurt that makes people want to be funny because it's a way to kind of deflect. And
Yeah, and
I mean,
then
it's certainly
yeah, it would be easier for a comedic actor. I mean, and look how many who I mean, you have Robin Williams, you have Jim Carrey, you have
mhm,
Steve Carell's another one. You know,
absolutely.
they've all done the comedy and turned it in and done dramatic roles.
I
But
mean, there's no bigger example than I think Vince Gilligan is the guy who proved this whole thing, because the guy who played Walter White was the dad on Malcolm in the Middle. That is not the same character, but he knew he could do it. And I think that that's the thing that's really remarkable. And you look at Michael McKean on Better Call Saul and Bob Odenkirk on Better Call Saul, they're both comedians, but they played the darkness incredibly well. So I feel like I always point to Vince Gilligan as one of my casting heroes because he took chances on people, and I think that that's something that I love to do is to cast people and let them flourish in a way that they hadn't been able to before.
yeah, you have such a great cast that blends so well together. And like you said, nobody was trying to outshine somebody else. Everybody had equal parts, and the blending and the synergy amongst the cast members was absolutely fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'll tell them all you said that.
Well, how long did it take you to film the whole feature?
Oh boy, 16 days.
Wow.
16
And
days. We had 20 originally, before about 2 weeks before we lost 2 of those days, and then we lost another 2 days, and it has a lot to do with just there were schedule issues, and there were other issues that came up. I'm not, everyone who was involved gave their best, but it certainly was a thing where we had to we had to think on our feet, and there's a scene that I just didn't shoot, because I was like, well, if anything has to go, like that saves me at least a half a day that I know that I don't need that. And then I'll have to think about how I can do the rest of it. So there are things that, and I don't want to say it's a compromise. They're just ways that you have to, again, think on your feet and work hard to get what it really forces you to say, what's the real story? What is the essential? And if you focus on the essential, then you can't go wrong. And so it meant, you know, some days I had to shoot 10 pages of dialogue. It's tough. But they were all game, and the actors, we would have never been able to pull it off had the actors not been on board. And again, that's the thing where, it's all credit goes to them. Anyone could have slowed it down. Any one person who didn't understand that, we needed to keep things moving. I tried to do what I would do is I would film the entire scene almost like a play, and I'd get so the entire scene we would go through, get two cameras going all the way through. Then, if I didn't quite get it on one camera, like the person I was looking at, I would do it again, but then I would have the second camera go and get it. So if I was doing a second take or a third take, the second camera would get something else that was, so I would always pick up more and more and more. So instead of, when people talk about how many takes did you do, I'll say let's say I had an average of 4 takes on every line of dialogue. But while that line of dialogue was happening, the second camera would go and get something else. So I got all of the extra stuff during, anytime I had to do a retake.
So did that help in the editing process?
Absolutely. Because instead of, If I'd had one camera, I would have had to go and get everything that I needed from that one and then go get all those other things. So that's the only way that we could have done it in 16 days. And I always wanted to do work with two cameras anyway because of what we talked about earlier. It helps with keeping the spontaneity, but I would never have been able to get it in 16 days had it been for that.
Well, I understand you have three more feature films in development. Can you tell us about any of those?
I can. Well, one of them I wrote. One of them's an adaptation of a bestseller, and it's called Business or Pleasure. It's something that is. I read the book and I wrote to my agent. And I said, "Absolutely, absolutely, get me a meeting with this author. I love this, and I see it as a movie." That one I'm probably not going to direct. I might be able to, but again, I understand if they need a bigger name because it's going to cost more money, um, and that's fine. Then I have another one that is a murder mystery comedy that I'm really excited about, which has the same idea of like keeping it contained, the same Lynn Shelton methodology. It's all takes place over one murder mystery party, and but things get very murdery. Let's just say it's a game that turns quite murdery, and that one's a lot of fun. And then I have one that is with, and we have some cast attached to that. I can't say who yet, but so that one's moving forward. And then I'm doing one with American High, who is a fantastic producer who does kind of teen comedies. And I wrote, my writing partner and I wrote one that we made a short film about a long time ago, and we wrote a feature version of it. It's the film that got optioned and got me moving to Los Angeles. At the time, it was called Driver's Ed, but now it's called Crash Course, and it is a teen comedy, but it's got a lot of heart also. And they're doing that, and I'm going to be directing that one, so that's exciting. So
So, where can all of my viewers and listeners see home delivery?
home delivery is still in theaters, and it's you can look at where they're going to be on homedeliverymovie.com/theaters. It's also going to come fairly soon, I think at the end of April, to be able to rent, which will be great, um, or purchase. Yeah, and hopefully when you purchase it, we'll have some of the extras that I was mentioning. We have a great bloopers reel that I want to share. It's so much fun. And then we have streaming will happen at some point during the summer.
Ah, fantastic. Fantastic. I love this film. Ladies and gentlemen,
Thank you.
comedy is back with Tom Harp's Home Delivery set in a sun-soaked LA. Home Delivery follows a pregnant model who invites her estranged family to witness the birth of her first child at home. But what begins as an intimate family moment quickly spirals into chaos as long buried tensions surface. Unexpected guests arrive, and the unpredictable realities of childbirth bring everyone together in a very hilarious and heartfelt ways. Now, the film features a celebrated ensemble cast, including Melanie Field, Donald Faison, and Lindsay Sloan, as well as Jimmy Simpson and Joe Pantoliano, as well as Leslie Ann Warren, Peter McNichol, and Tracy Toms. Now, blending sharp comedy with touching family drama, Home Delivery explores the messy, unpredictable, and often hilarious nature of family relationships during life's biggest moments. Again, comedy is back, wrapped with some heartfelt drama. Home Delivery is a must see film in my book. And I want to thank you, Tom, for sharing this film with me today, and much success to Home Delivery as well as your next feature films.
Thank you so much. This has been an absolute delight. Your questions are fantastic, and it's just been an honor being here.
Well, it was great to have you here, Tom. And again, ladies and gentlemen, Home Delivery is in theaters. So, well, go to the movie theater and enjoy this film like it's supposed to be seen. Sitting in the seat with popcorn, candy, and soda. That's the only way you want to do it. So, ladies and gentlemen, you can watch or listen to all of the Bond on Cinema interviews at bondoncinema.com. Check out our Prime show, our YouTube channel. We're also on Spotify, iTunes, and more. And remember, you'll either see me at the movies or from the red carpet.